Hi, and welcome to The Bridge. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are a Markham Community Church located in the Greater Toronto Area with a passion for helping you engage in an authentic, life-giving community. We would love to connect with you further. Please take a moment and check out our website, where you can find more information about our ministry. Well, we hope you're blessed by today's message.
This morning, we'd like to continue our series on Colossians on the topic of relationships that reward. I'd like to just share a little story. I heard about the story about this groom who was at the wedding rehearsal, and he said to the minister who was conducting the wedding, said, "I'll make a deal with you." He said, during the vows, if you could just leave out all that love and honor and obey stuff, and I'll give you $100. So he slipped the minister the $100 bill and went off and walked off with a smile. The next morning during the ceremony, the minister said, during the vows to the young man, "Do you promise to obey your wife in everything, to take her breakfast in bed, and to fulfill every desire of her?" And he gulped in astonishment and in a weak voice said, "I do." And then he whispered over to the minister's ear and said, "I thought we had a deal." And the minister handed back the $100 bill and said, "Well, your wife made me a better offer." This morning, we want to continue our series and focus on relationships that reward, particularly from Colossians chapter 3, verses 18 to 25. Now, God has created us all as relational beings, but unfortunately, we at times don't interact with each other well, and the results are emotional pain and turmoil. We say things that hurt, we express negative attitudes, and then we do things that harm our relationships. So let's look from Scripture in this portion where Paul highlights three vital relationships that we all may function in, at least some of us in all three, or at least in one. So let's look in these three relationships: marriage, parenting, and employment or work, where employer-employee, a boss relationship style. So we're all in one of these three. We've all been a child to someone. And some of us are in two, some of us are in three. So let's look at this portion in Colossians 3. It says, "Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it, not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." So here Paul talks about three types of relationships with the intent that we would function in a healthy, Christ-honoring way. But he also admonishes certain dysfunctions in these relationships with the hope that Jesus would change everything. Pastor Brian last week shared a message on how we are to put off the old garments of our negative character traits and put on the new garments of Christ's character. And the reason is, by these character traits, we can help foster healthy relationships. In Colossians 3:12 to 14, Paul writes, "As God's chosen people, clothe yourself with compassion and with kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. Above all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." You see, to have healthy relationships, we are to be clothed with these virtues. And a lack of them is a primary cause for a breakdown in relationships. When we are not showing compassion and understanding and forgiveness, and if we're not humble and gentle, or if we're not patient with our spouse or our children or in any relationship, suddenly there will be a breakdown. So I'd like to take a moment this morning to go through these three key relationships. And so let's begin with marriage, because in all honesty, marriage is the most intimate and closest relationship any two people will have on this earth. Now, someone once said, before marriage, opposites attract, but after marriage, opposites attack. We all desire the happily ever after we read in fairy tales, and unfortunately, the divorce rate in our culture is at an all-time high. So whatever happened to happily ever after? It seems more like marriages are about the happily never after. And so after marriage, it's never happy. And so, because we forget one important thing, is that the wedding day is not the place of arrival, but it's the place where the adventure begins. We spend a lot of time and money preparing for the wedding day, but unfortunately not a lot of time preparing for the married life. Or even when we're married, little time is invested in reading books together, attending conferences, praying, seeking counseling, going to seminars to invest in a healthy marriage. And so this morning I'd like to focus upon the expectations that we bring into our marriage. Many marriage problems are due to harmful expectations. So if you would visualize with me regarding desires and expectations, just think about two boxes. The first box is our desires. The second box is our expectations. We were all born with desires that are healthy and normal, such as respect and admiration and companionship and acceptance and intimacy and a desire for sex and love. And among all these things, these are healthy desires. So they're all in box one. But the moment we start taking things out of box one and placing them in box two, in expectations, it's then we turn our desires into expectations as we begin to make our marriage from a covenant relationship to a contract relationship. We start to take things that are based on a mutual covenant into an expectation of a contract of exchange of goods and services. Do you feel this morning that your marriage is more like a contract between two parties or a covenant between two committed people? Our expectations shape our reality. They will change our emotions and our physicality and how we do certain things. So we need to be extra careful regarding our expectations that we harbor towards our spouses and towards our children, towards our parents, towards our careers. We need to be careful on those expectations. You know, once a wife was complaining to her husband and his inability to show affection, said, just look at that couple down the road. See them, just look at them, how he keeps holding her hand and kissing her and holding the door for her. Why can't you do the same? And the husband replied and said, are you crazy? I barely know that woman. Let me not continue on that. And so, as marriage counselors, Les and Leslie Parrott, in their excellent book, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts, they suggested 4 myths or expectations that torpedo marriages because of unrealistic expectations and misconceptions that we may carry in our marriage. Now, these are the 4. We expect exactly the same things from our marriage. The second is everything good in our relationship will get better. Third, everything bad in my life will disappear. And fourth, my spouse will make me whole or complete. Now, once we realize these 4 myths, and then we can settle ourselves and understand these are unhealthy expectations, we can get into the real world of what marriage is and how we should function in it. So let's quickly go through these 4 expectations. Number 1, we expect exactly the same things from marriage. Now, when people are in love, it's easy to assume that the other person has the same values and expectations as we do. But do you know that every family has its own culture, its own values, and we assume that things will continue the same as it was when we were little children and when we became teenagers and how we lived at home with as young adults. We think that those things will continue in married life. Now, one way that these differing expectations play out is through unspoken rules of each family. Now, we're not usually aware of the unspoken rules and expectations until the other person breaks them. And then we realize we get upset and irritated and angry why our spouse didn't do something that we expected. Someone gave this great wisdom. This word said, expectations are the mother of resentments. Why is it that we resent our spouse or our children or our parents? It's because we've had these certain expectations and suddenly they've been broken. These unexpected rules that we thought that they would do and fulfill. And when they don't live up to it, we're not happy. Now, it's helpful to sit back and go through your own life and think about the rules of your family of origin, about those unspoken rules that you've brought in to your current situation in family life. And here are some rules of various families. Some have these unspoken rules of don't ask for help unless you're desperate. Downplay your success. Get someone else to do the hard and dirty work. Don't get sick. Never get angry. Don't go to bed without cleaning the kitchen. Don't talk about your feelings. Don't ever get daddy upset. Don't waste your money on needless items. Now, can you see how these unspoken rules can cause havoc in a relationship, especially if the other person has no idea what these rules are? Very early on in our marriage, Ann and I had a huge fight. It was in our first year of marriage, and we were living in a condo in London, Ontario at that time, and we now call it jokingly the box incident of 2015. So if you ever see her, you can say, I heard about the box incident of 2015, and she probably have a laugh. So what happened was I had bought a pair of shoes, and I took the box, and I left it in the study. And Ann asked me to throw it away, and I kept saying, I would, and I never did. Until one day, it became a huge fight. You see, I had an unspoken expectation that Ann would naturally move it if it was in the wrong place. And I just assumed that if any one of us saw something that was in the right place, we would just move it without being asked or told. But this unexpected expectation, or unconscious expectation, exploded into probably our biggest fight in our marriage to today. It evolved from something simple as a box into a few days of harsh words and anger and resentment. You see, the box incident opened up other issues, other expectations. The box was just the trigger. It wasn't even the real issue, in all honesty. It was just the trigger that opened up a range of other issues. Now, eventually, we forgave each other and got reconciled, and now we look back and we joke about it, and we've actually memorialized that event as the box incident of 2015, and so we joke about it when certain things approach that level, and we say, remember the box incident of 2015? Right? And so we've marked it to help us remember and to learn from that incident. But we create these. Now, to be honest, I failed many times after that, to be honest, but we're still working at it. To be honest, expectations can take a small issue and make it bigger than it is. Expectations can take a small issue and blow it out of proportion from something that's very small. Now, another source of expectations that cause problems are unconscious roles that spouses should fall into. Now, we inherit these expectations of roles by watching our parents or watching other adults or watching our uncles, aunts, or maybe from our culture or place of origin, and we see certain things and we expect our spouses to fulfill that role. For example, a new husband surprised his wife at dinner by picking up his empty glass of iced tea and tinkling the ice from it, and he was expecting, like his father always signaled to his mother, that he was ready for more iced tea. And you can imagine the bride was not pleased to learn that her husband expected to play the role of a pampered king whose every woman's desire was to be fulfilled. You see, the myth that we expect exactly the same things from marriage is busted by identifying the unspoken expectations and the unconscious roles that we assume our spouses should fulfill. Myth number 2, or expectation number 2, everything good in our relationship will get better. You know, when people fall in love, they believe their love will last forever because it's so intense and it's so intoxicating. They believe everything good about the relationship will get better and better. Keyword, everything. But reality is not everything gets better. Many things improve, but some things actually become more difficult. Every successful marriage requires necessary losses. And in choosing to marry, you inevitably go through a mourning process. You go through a mourning process of loss. For some, it means giving up our childhood, the security and the comfort of growing up with our parents, and suddenly you're thrust into a world where it's different and you thought it would be the same. A young wife said to her husband when he returned from work one day, "I have great news for you. Pretty soon, we're going to be 3 in the house." And her husband ran to her and kissed her and smiled with delight, with glowing excitement and expectation of the third person arriving in the home, when his wife said, "I'm glad you feel this way, since tomorrow morning my mother will be moving in with us." Genesis 2:24, God said this, for that reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and they will become one flesh. You see, marriage means giving up the carefree life of being single, coming to terms with the new limits. It means unexpected inconveniences. Marriage means passing one's plans and choices through the filter of us rather than me or I. It means taking all of our decisions and discussing them rather than a unilateral implementation. See, by far, the most dramatic loss experience in a new marriage is the idealized image that we have of our partner. See, each of us has this airbrushed mental picture of our partner. But eventually, as we get married and we start living together, we start to realize that we did not marry the person we thought we did. We start to realize, what happened? Who is this person? Because we carry this mental picture, this airbrushed image of our spouse, and thought that this is who they were. But once we remove this idealized image and we embrace reality, then we realize that we married another person who is a flawed and fallen human being. Now, the good news is because God gives grace for reality, not for illusion or imagery or fascination, that way grace can work in our relationship. We need to move that mental image, that picture, that idealized idea that we have of our spouse, remove that to reality where God can work. And the good news of that is intimacy is also only available with a real person, not with an image, but with a real person. Myth number 3, or expectation number 3, everything bad in my life will disappear. Marriage is a beautiful institution invented by God, but it does not erase personal pain or eliminate loneliness. You see, the bad traits and feelings that we carried before we got married will continue after we got married. You see, getting married does not eliminate and does not leave after the wedding ceremony. Getting married cannot instantly cure all of our loneliness and our inner problems. However, marriage can be a powerful healing agent over time. Can become a powerful healing agent. Because one of the biggest reasons is through the power of love. And I believe God's love is the strongest healing agent in the universe. In marriage, God can love us through our spouses. Our spouses can be essentially Jesus with skin. Jesus with skin. Now some of you are thinking, God, no, my spouse is nowhere near like Jesus. That's why last week Pastor Brian was sharing about how we are to put on Christ and reflect his character and his nature. For example, a young lady experienced a great deal of rejection in relationships before she met her husband. And over time, her husband's faithful love and acceptance helped her find healing in the rejection and pain that she carried all through her life. And so we are to be Jesus to our family. And finally, the last expectation is, my spouse will make me whole. Have you ever heard this, or maybe you've said this before, or you believed it, or maybe even wrote it on your Valentine's Day card? You complete me. You make me whole. You are everything that I ever need and want in life. Have you ever said that, thought that, wrote that? But you know it's not true. Couples who swallow this myth that their spouse will make them whole are in danger of going to two extremes. The first extreme is unhealthy dependence. It's called an enmeshed relationship. They unconsciously make their partner completely responsible for their well-being. Completely responsible for it. It's actually a form of idolatry because we are looking to our partner to provide the emotional living water that only God says He can give and only He can complete. The other extreme is a disengaged relationship. These spouses are so isolated and independent of each other, they basically function as neighbors or business associates in their marriage. It's also a form of idolatry because now that person is looking into themselves instead of God to provide meaning for their life. So neither enmeshed relationships or disengaged relationships are healthy, and neither will allow us to experience wholeness. But wholeness is found in an interdependent relationship, where two people with self-respect and dignity make a commitment to nurture their own spiritual and emotional growth as well as their partners. And mesh relationships, I'd like to give you some visuals by way of letters to help us to see what type of relationship. And mesh relationships are like the capital A. If you would slice it down to break that, you would see that they lean on each other so much that if one moves, the whole structure falls down, because their security is on another person instead of God. Disengaged relationships are like the letter H. If you slice it down, partners can eventually stand virtually alone. If one lets go, the other one hardly feels they've lost anything. But an interdependent relationships are like the letter M. They cannot stand on their own, but they can stand on their own, but they choose to stay connected to the other out of their fullness, not out of their emptiness. If one lets go, the other feels the loss, but they still can recover. You see, every marriage is between two broken people, two fallen people who cannot make each other whole. We're called to love and respect each other, serve and celebrate each other. But only God can make us whole. You see, you cannot add two fractions. You cannot add a half and 3/4 together unless the denominator is the same. And Christ is that denominator that can cause us to find unity and addition, to get connected. Christ has to be that fulfillment in our lives, so in order that we don't place it on our spouse to feel that. I'd like to do a little demonstration this morning, and I'm going to call up Murray and Nancy this morning to help us in our demonstration. And here's a caveat: this is not a reflection, the demonstration, on their marriage, all right? So whatever happens, let's not attribute that. So come and stand behind the table here. How long have you been married for?
36 years.
36 years. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give each of you a block. All right. And what they have to do is they can only use one finger. And with that one finger, they have to take the block and they have to place it on top of this glass. All right. And they only have 10 seconds to do this. All right. So can I get counter Grace? Do you mind just giving them 10 seconds with one finger? So we'll leave it here. All right. And one finger, 10 seconds. Let's see if they can get these two blocks up on here. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right, go. All right. Good job. They actually did it a different way than the first couple did, but that you still got it good. So 35 years of marriage, or 36, great job. Thank you, guys. Now, to be honest, a lot of people don't realize, and they may try to do this independently. But you could see Murray and Nancy, they did it together. Now, the easiest way would have been bringing both blocks together and lifting it there. But they still got both blocks up there, so let's give them a hand. You see, in marriage and relationships, it's about working together. It's not isolation. It's not about what I need, but it's what we need. And we work together in our relationships. So this morning, ask yourself, what expectations have we brought into our marriages that is causing pain and disunity? Now, not only expectations are placed on our spouse, but we actually sometimes place our expectation on our children as well. You know, I was listening to a podcast this week where the speaker was sharing about how today parents derive their primary sense of fulfillment and joy from their kids. Key word, primary. Their primary sense of fulfillment and joy is from their kids. And this results with kids having a lot of pressure in their lives to perform and succeed and to make their parents happy. And it's causing a lot of anxiety and stress and depression in the next generation. Because a lot of things that the parents haven't had in their lives, they want their kids to experience, and the kids feel that I need to make my parents happy. And that adds a lot of pressure. So parents, be careful not to project your life onto your kids, nor live your life through your kids. And what I mean is, maybe we didn't get a chance to do something. Don't make your kids live what you want or what you missed in life. Someone once said, be careful, and said this, parent your child by their first name, not their last name. Very often, our family reputation overrides the unique needs and care for our children who need them individually. They override that. And so we have to look at this area of parenting, and I'd like to cover that this morning. And Paul addresses the need for healthy parent-child relationships. He addresses the part of the parent and part of the child. Now, since we're in a room of adults, I'll skip the children obey your parents part. But we know that as children, especially when they're young and they're growing up, and they are to obey and listen to their parents and learn. Now, one way of healthy parenting is to realize the stages of parenting. And I'd like to just cover these 4 stages. Now, there are many ways to describe this, but I've chosen this way. And look at this stage, or these stages of parenting. 4 stages. From 0 to 5 are the discipline years. During this stage, we begin to teach our children that there are consequences for their behavior. From 5 to 12 are the training years. And during this stage, we concentrate on putting the why behind the what of our family rules and expectations. The 3rd stage, are from 12 to 18 years, are the coaching years. Parenting happens a bit more through our advice from the sidelines, while the relationship moves towards connection rather than correction. And so we focus on being that coach that talks to that child and helps them through conversation. Then the 4th stage is 19 and up, is the friendship years. And as adults, we enjoy one another's company and we process life together and enjoy it together. Now, each stage bleeds with each other, and each child is different, so some stages are longer, some stages are shorter. At certain stages, you need a mixture of both. But this is a general guideline that will help us. And so in those early discipline years, when a child doesn't obey and runs across a crowded parking lot, correcting bad choices happen immediately. During the training years, you need to explain more and giving explanations along with the correction. By the time they reach the coaching years, our responses to our kids' bad choices should be guided through a conversation, explanation, helping them to see reality, see life. Now, parents tend to focus on different areas differently. Some on behavior, some on relationships, some on functionality, some on spirituality. And I'd like to focus on these 4 components because sometimes the problem happens when we overemphasize one to the neglect of the other. And so some parents focus on behavioral issues or their behavior, and they want their children basically to stay out of trouble, follow the rules, and listen to whatever they say. Now, the problem with that is, as parents, we can become helicopter parents, always trying to be controlling and micromanaging and trying to over-parent them. And so that can become a danger of just focusing on behavior. Or we focus on the relational aspect where we want our children to develop good relationships with us and within the family. But the danger of that, of focusing only on that, is over-attachment. An inability for that child to actually function in the real world because they've only had mommy and daddy for everything in their lives. The third component is functionality, where we focus on their career and their education, their success, that we want them to be successful in life, and that's an important area. But the danger happens when our success becomes the core identity and the marker to see if we've made it. For example, we may believe that my children will be successful if they make a lot of money. My children will be successful if they get good grades. My children will be successful if they're popular. My children will be successful if they participate in a lot of activities. You see the danger that happens. Now, they should be successful. They should be functional. You don't want kids who are not functional in life. And the 4th component is spirituality, which is probably the most important, where we form a personal relationship with Jesus and they're able to reflect themselves to the world as Christ's followers. Now, while this is the most important and something that we must ardently work towards, the danger can be is if it becomes our only focus, we may actually create a hyper-spiritual child, or we may create our child to become pharisaical or judgmental of other kids and other families. And so overemphasizing one to the neglect of any other section is also not helpful. We need to have a balance of all of them: behavior, relationships, functionality, and the most important, spirituality. All 4 are very important. We have to be careful not to overemphasize one over all the others. Andy Stanley once said this: "Don't give up what is unique to you for something someone else will do." You see, we live in a very busy world, and it's very easy that we could get caught up in our careers, our enjoyments, our pleasures, where someone else can do what we do at work, but no one else can do what you can do as a father or as a mother. That's a unique role given to you and only you. Our greatest contribution may not be something that we do, but someone we raise. Our greatest contribution in life may not be something we do, but someone we raise. So love your kids. Don't provoke them to anger, but nurture them and be an example to them. And this is a very important area of parenting. And finally, Paul talks about our work life. So the question is, why do we work? Now, a couple of weeks ago, I did share a sermon on vocational health, and I'm not going to go into all the details of it. You can always listen to that sermon. But why do we work? What's our purpose for our profession? Well, I'd like to give you 3 thoughts regarding that. First is, the reason why we work is to honor God by reflecting and glorifying Him. That's the most important reason. We honor God and reflect Him. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do, whether you eat or you drink, do it all for the glory of God. Whatever we do, even in our parenting, even in our marriage, even in our work, it's all for the glory of God. The second reason is to impact others at our work in our community. Why does God place us in where we are? Is so that we would be a salt and a light, that we would influence others by our character and our words and our conversations. So when we're at work, someone come to us and say, why are you so different? Why are you so patient? Why do you work so well? Why do you not cut corners and cheat and lie when everyone else is doing it? And then that can become a conversation to show Jesus and impact other people's lives. And finally, is to make money, to provide for you and for your family, to put food on the table, to provide a place for your family and for yourself to live. These 3 key areas. Now, here's an important reason Paul summarizes of why and how we should function and work. He says, basically, to keep Jesus as the center of your work, the purpose and motivation for succeeding, and the foundation of your career. He says this, keep Jesus at the center of your work, and the purpose and motivation for succeeding, and the foundation of your career. That's why he writes in Colossians 3:23 and 24, work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. And so he says this, you may not have a good boss, your work environment may not be great, or your coworkers, and God may give you a season to determine whether you should be there or not. That's another question. But wherever you are, Paul says, serve as if you're doing it for Jesus. Work hard with ethics and character because of Jesus, because you're serving Jesus more than man. Hudson Taylor said this, and he was talking about how whatever we do, even if it's small, it's big. He said, a little thing is a little thing, but faithfulness in a little thing is a big thing to God. Never think that your job or your work is unimportant. Whether it's something big or small, if you do it with faithfulness and with reflection of Jesus, it's important. It's big. It impacts others. And so we should always do our work with integrity, honesty, and with our best effort. As I close this morning, I'd like to just summarize what Paul is basically trying to share about these 3 key relationships with 3 foundational truths. Paul wants to create and help us to maintain healthy relationships. And he says basically this. He said, let Christ be our model, and let communication be our method, and charity or love be the means and the motive why we do this. So let me unpack this quickly here as we close. Christ is our model. How we relate to other people is to emulate the nature and character of Jesus Christ. And so he's our model, and that's why you see in this portion, he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ, and work as if you were working for Christ, and we parent as God would do it for us. And so Christ is our model. And then our communication is not just words, but it's being vulnerable, authentic, removing the masks. And here our communication is expressed in three ways: by our actions, our attitude, and our words. By our actions, we love one another, serve them, serve our spouses, serve our children, our parents, our work. We serve, we act out. Then in our attitude, Paul talks about spouses submitting one to another. We submit in our attitudes to one another. It's not I'm the boss or I'm the king, you listen to me. It's what can we do? How can we submit to one another? Paul writes of that in Ephesians 5:20. He says, fathers, don't provoke your children. It's our attitude. But then it's also our words. Our words should be words of love. You see, love is not just saying sappy, nice things about each other, but it's also something where we speak truth. Paul writes about in Ephesians, speak the truth in love. Because if we truly love someone, we will speak what they need to hear, not just what they want to hear. If you truly love them, if you truly love your children, there are times you have to speak truth to them and say, this is not how it should be, but you do it with love. We will speak so that they'll be able to grow. And the means and the motive, it should always be done in charity. In Colossians 3:15, Paul says, above all these things, put on love. The way we relate to our spouses, our children, our work should be with the motive and the currency and the means of love. So that once we've built that relationship, you could see the arrow pointing to the others, is we reflect that to others in all of our relationship. And so God wants us to be healthy in these three key relationships this morning: our marriages, our parenting, and on our employment. I'll close with this story as we prepare to worship and celebrate and understand who Jesus is. You know, God wants us to live in relationships, and we need each other. But the story is told of it's a crude and a cruel experiment carried out by Emperor Frederick, who ruled the Holy Roman Empire in the 13th century. And he wanted to know, what was humanity's original language? Was it Hebrew, Greek, or Latin? So he decided to do this. He would isolate a few infants that were immediately born, that they would never hear the voice of another human being. They would not hear the words of someone. And so he hired nurses that would take care of these kids and promise never to say a word. And so when these infants were born, they never heard a word, never the sound of a human voice, because he wanted to know what words they would say naturally without any influence. Unfortunately, within several months, all these infants were dead. You see, we were all created for relationships. Christ is our model. Communication is our method. And the motive should be out of love. And so may we reflect Jesus, because Jesus changes. And maybe your marriage here today is struggling, but remember, Jesus can change that. Or maybe your parent-child relationship is struggling. Jesus can change that. Or maybe your career is not going where it should be. Jesus can help us to work with an understanding of what he wants us to do. Can we pray together? And I have a prayer. Maybe if you feel comfortable, just say this prayer aloud with me as we just repeat this prayer as a prayer of faith. Let's just pray. God, thank you for all the relationships you have given to me. Help me to value the people you have placed in my life. Grant me grace to model Jesus in my actions and attitudes and words by radiating your love. Transform our lives, marriages, and families so that we can be a living reflection of hope to our world through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. This Easter season, as we're coming up to Palm Sunday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday, it's going to be a wonderful time to gather. And so just watch this video that promotes our coming Easter services, and then we'll worship God as we close.